air, water, earth. Ancient warriors are beast warriors of 3 different attributes to represent the 3 kingdoms from the story of the same name, which may or may not be based on a real event. And because of that, the ancient warriors also have continuous spells called sagas that give you benefits when they leave the field. Every story must end eventually. Plenty of people seem to be under the impression that this is a deck exclusively for going second, but taking advantage of our sagas and our ancient warriors to help us get our sagas, we are going to be conquering the game regardless of whether we went first or second. Before we talk about how we can do that though, what is it exactly that we are going to take advantage of? This deck aims to prevent the opponent from killing you while interrupting them in the process to make it easier, and then break the opponent's board at the soonest convenient moment to beat them. And the main ways that we go about this are with Ancient Warriors Saga, Defense of Changban, in order to give us great survivability, Ancient Warriors East by South Winds to make it really easy to break boards, Ancient Warriors Oath Double Dragon Lords to interrupt by removing cards, and lastly Ancient Warriors Ingenious Zhugekong to interrupt by negating cards. These are going to be the cards that the rest of our deck is focused around getting so that we can achieve all of their purposes. Defense of Changban, this is a continuous trap that says if your ancient warriors battle, they turn off the opponent's back row like ancient gears. Then it has an on-field effect and an effect in grave. Start of the battle phase, you could send it from the field to the grave to make it so your opponents can't actually attack into your ancient warriors. Basically meaning if you control only ancient warriors, then they can't attack at all that turn. But then it does more in the grave. If they do declare an attack, then you can summon an ancient warriors monster from your deck, giving even more survivability. Although you can't use that effect the same turn that you send it to the grave for its other effect. This card is so good because of all 3 of its effects. Its first effect making battling really easy against back row. Its second effect basically gives you a free turn of survivability, and that grave effect can hold off at least 1 attack by summoning an ancient warriors monster from the deck. And if the monster you summon is big enough, then it might even be holding off multiple attacks. Because of how well this card keeps us alive, this is often going to be the main thing we aim to rely on when we are playing this deck. Such a great survival card means that we are nearly guaranteed to have a follow-up turn, so the rest of our cards can be saved for beating the opponent's strategy when it comes to that turn. When we get to our follow-up turn, we can use our board breaker East by South Winds. It's a continuous spell that 2 turns after you activate it, you are able to send it to the grave, and once per turn during your main phase, you can flip a coin, and if you get hit, you can send it to the grave. Why does this card have 2 effects that just send it to the graveyard? It's because it has a really amazing effect that if it is sent to the graveyard, that for the rest of this turn, your opponent cannot respond to your ancient warriors effects, and whenever you attack with one of your ancient warriors, you can destroy a card your opponent controls. The way this works is when you attack into a monster, you can destroy that monster and still get to attack into another monster, or directly if they don't have any other monsters. And none of these destructions are once per turn either, so you are very likely going to be able to destroy everything that needs to be destroyed and attack for game. The only issue, of course, is that the card itself doesn't guarantee you will be able to get it into the grave unless you wait a couple of turns. That's just too long to wait, so we are going to be relying on our other ancient warriors effects to send this from the field to the grave, since our other monsters can gain some benefits from sending our saga back row to the grave. One of the weaknesses of back row is that the opponent can try to get rid of them with effects at times you might not like them to, but we might actually be able to negate those with Ingenious Zhugekong. If a back row is activated, then you can send one of your sagas to the grave to negate that activation. This is great not only because it's a way to get your sagas in the grave for their grave effect, but also because negating back row can be hurtful for a lot of deck strategies. The card actually does get upgraded though if you control Ancient Warriors Virtue's Lu Juan, because if you do, you can also send a saga to the grave to negate a monster effect, and you don't necessarily have to do one or the other. If you have 2 sagas, you could send one to negate a back row per turn, and the other to negate a monster per turn. It's just that you can't negate monsters if you don't also control the virtuous Liu Shen. Negating back row like Void Ogre is really huge. The fact that it can also negate monsters like Crystal Wing is pretty insane. It does require setup, and you won't always be able to get both negates, but even just that back row negate is often going to be good enough because this deck has more interruption than just this. Maybe the best card for both survival and board breaking is Ancient Warriors Oath Double Dragon Lords. It's a link 2 that requires 2 beast warriors, and one of those beast warriors has to be a wind attribute ancient warriors monster. All of the ancient warriors warriors are beast warriors. If you look closely enough at their art, they have animals depicted somewhere on their clothes, but they are divided into wind attribute, fire attribute, and water attribute. So when you go to summon this, keep in mind that you got to use one of the wind attribute ones to go into this. It makes all of your ancient warriors gain 500 attack and defense. This buff across your whole board can be incredibly relevant, and ingenious Zhuge normally has 2000 defense, but if you have double dragon lords on the field, then it will be 2500 defense, which is pretty formidable and makes it a lot easier for it to survive in battle if it comes to that. And it generally makes all of your other ancient warriors much more threatening. Double dragon lords also has a quick effect to send any card from your hand or field to the grave to return an opponent's face up card to the hand. So this is not only going to be a nice way to interrupt the opponent and break their board by removing cards from their field to the hand like in the middle of their combos, but it is also going to be a nice way to send your own cards to the grave to potentially help you use your Saga's grave effects. Like if you wanted to OTK your opponent, you could use this to send an East by South winds to the grave to return an opponent's card to the hand, which would cause the East by South winds to stop your opponent from being able to respond to any of your effects, and also let you destroy their whole board as you attack into them. Even if they don't die that turn, you've gained so much board advantage that it may be impossible for them to come back. The most insane part of it all is that on Link Summon, this searches any Ancient Warriors card. Our monsters, our back row, all of it can be searched with this Link monster. So we could easily just play one defensive Shongbang to search for it with this on turn 1, and we could easily play one copy of East by South Winds to search for this if we are going second and think we can OTK, and if not, then on our follow-up turn, we could search for this with a second copy of the Double Dragon Lords to immediately activate it and trigger its grave effect by sending it to the grave with the Double Dragon Lords. And a nice thing you could consider doing is using one of your monsters alongside your Double Dragon Lords to go into another copy of Double Dragon Lords just to get the search off, since the Link 2 itself is also a wind attribute, so you can easily do that. So turn 1, we can set up a protective field with our defense of Shongban to keep us alive one way or another. So the Double Dragon Lords will have searched for it and will itself be able to bounce opponents' cards to interrupt their combos. We might also have an ingenious Zhuge to negate back row, and if we are lucky, monsters. That's a pretty damn strong turn 1 play for interruption and survival. And then as an OTK play going second, or on a follow-up play, we can search for the East by South winds with Double Dragon Lords, then that Double Dragon Lords can trigger it to make breaking the opponent's board and OTKing super easy. First things first, I need to talk about the skill that this deck uses. Spell Swap Fire Formation Tenki, which as you might imagine lets you search for Fire Formation Tenki. It's just a continuous spell that searches a level 4 or lower beast warrior from the deck. By playing Tenki in your deck, for each copy of Tenki you are getting an additional copy of any given level 4 beast warrior in your deck. And what this skill does is it lets you shuffle any fire formation into the deck to replace it with a Fire Formation Tenki. This basically means that every fire formation you play in your deck is going to be able to represent access to any of your level 4 ancient warriors. There are 3 generically useful fire formations you can use, the first of which is the Tenki itself, but there are also Tensu and Gyoku. Tensu gives you a bonus normal summon for beast warriors, and Gyoku lets you pin down an opponent's back row. Bonus normal summons and back row pinning are both pretty nice ways to play against the opponent's interruptions. If you don't need them, you could always shuffle them back to get a Tenki. Some people play only one copy of Tenki, because if they play a bunch of Tensu and Gyoku, they'll be able to use those to get through interruptions, but if they need some added consistency, they could always turn it into a Tenki if they need. This theory is pretty good for min-maxing your opening hand. However, there are going to be a lot of situations where the only thing you need to top deck in order to get your plays going is a starter, and the more starters you have left in your deck, the better. So if this is important to you, then you should be running 3 copies of Tenki to give you a higher chance of drawing into it. Oh, by the way, before I forget, every fire formation boosts beast warriors by 100 attack. It's not that deep, but it is good to know. The reason it's so important to guarantee a search with Tenki is because the best starter in this deck is Masterful Sun Mao, and we want to be able to get access to him as much as possible. Masterful Sun Mao can send a card from hand or field to the grave in order to search for any Ancient Warriors monster. You could just discard any card with this, but you might send one of your Sagas or Fire formations to the grave. The monster we are usually going to search with this is Ingenious Zhuge. We've talked about this monster before. It's the one that can negate back row, but can negate monsters too in certain situations. But it has another effect. If it was added to your hand by the effect of an Ancient Warriors card, then it can special summon itself. You could just summon your Sun Mao, discard or send a card to search for Zhuge, which triggers the Zhuge to summon itself. Then you'll immediately have 2 materials to go into the Link 2 Double Dragon Lord, which can search for the defense of Shongban, and boom, you already have a pretty protective field of defense of Shongban and Double Dragon Lords. We've already talked about 2 sagas so far, but there's another great saga that also acts as a way to extend our plays further, especially alongside Masterful Sun Mao. Ancient Warriors Saga 3 Visits is a continuous spell that works kinda similarly to Black Whirlwind. If you summon an Ancient Ancient Warriors monster, then you can once per turn add a differently named Ancient Warriors monster from deck to hand. Then if it's sent to the grave, you can special summon any Ancient Warriors monster from your hand. If you had this, you could activate it and summon your Sun Mao, which will trigger the 3 visits to search for your Jugekong, which will then be able to special summon itself. Then you can use the Sun Mao, sending a card from your hand or field to the grave to search for Valiant Zhongdi. You have your 2 monsters on the field, but instead of using both of them to go into double Dragon Lords, we can keep the Jugekong on the field to act as a back renegade, and use the Zhongdi to special summon itself, since as long as you control at least 2 Ancient Warrior monsters, it can special summon itself from the hand, and that way you can use the Zhongdi and Sun Mao to go into double Dragon Lords, and use the double Dragon Lords to search for Defense of Shongban. From this, we have the double Dragon Lord to interrupt the opponent, the Jugekong, negate a spell or trap, and the Shongban for survivability. If you happen to open the Defense of Shongban or the Valiant Zhongdi, then you could instead search for Virtuous Liu Xuan. That way, when your Jugekong negates a back row or double Dragon Lords bounces a card, by sending your 3 visits to the grave, the 3 visits will trigger to summon the Liu Xuan from your hand, so that way you can use the Jugekong as a monster negate. These are really the main combos of the deck for real. It's pretty easy to set up some really nice survival interruption with this deck, and yet there's still so much more to talk about. All our Ancient Warriors can do so much more for us. The majority of this deck is focused around getting consistent access to our main plays, but as we go, we can often end up doing more than just these plays, because every monster has layers in this deck and serves multiple purposes. We already know that Masterful Sun Mao can send a card from hand or field to the grave to search any Ancient Warriors monster, but if you activate another Ancient Warriors monster's effect, it also targets to return an opponent's card to the hand. Simply searching for the Jugekong lets it activate to summon itself. Since it is an activation, you will immediately get to bounce an opponent's card with the Sun Mao. The fact that this threatens to remove the opponent's field while setting up your other plays means that the opponent really has no choice but to deal with this guy. The great thing is though, with all the consistency in the deck, we might end up being able to have a second copy of him that we can normal summon with the bonus normal summon of Tensu. Virtuous Liu Xuan, I haven't actually talked about other than the fact that it being on the field will let you use your Jugekong monster negate, but he himself has a couple of neat effects. Like if the opponent controls more monsters than you can send a card from your hand or field to the grave to summon another Ancient Warriors monster from the deck. The fact that the opponent has to control more monsters than you is pretty mid, since they won't control any monsters if we go first, and if we go second we have to hope they control more than one monster, otherwise this guy won't work. But the fact that this guy has the effect is something to keep in mind. If you are put into a weird situation, something you could do with this is summon a Sun Mao from the deck, which could search the Jugekong, which will summon itself, and as long as you have some sagas to dispose of, then you'll have both back row and monster negation and monster bouncing. Since if you control both Jugekong and Sun Mao on the opponent's turn, then the negate of Jugekong will trigger the Sun Mao to bounce their cards, making this a legitimately strong board. This is nice, but it is not consistent and it's a bit unreliable, so only resort to this if you have no other options. Liu Xuan can also draw a card once per turn if an Ancient Warrior monster is involved in battle. It's definitely not something to aim for, however it is nice that it is there. That's kind of the whole slogan for Liu Xuan. It's not great, but it's cool that it's there. To be real with you, if you wanted to cut this card, I wouldn't be mad at you for it. I do like having it available. The small benefits it gives you can come up in certain matchups. Another funny thing about Liu Xuan and Sun Mao is that they both have the effect that if you control another Ancient Warrior monster, then you can't attack into them. If you controlled both of them and had no other Ancient Warrior, the opponent wouldn't be able to attack you at all. Attack locks aren't that big of a deal when they don't have any inherent interruption associated with them, and we can lock the opponent off from attacking for a whole turn with Defense of Shongban already, so it's kind of redundant, but like everything else Liu Xuan does, it's kind of nice that it's there. The grave effect of Defense of Shongban to summon an Ancient Warriors monster from the deck if an opponent attacks gives us access to some pretty nice board setup that can make our follow-up plays a lot stronger. Maybe the biggest deal is that we could summon a Loyal Gwen Yuan from the deck. Normally this guy can special summon itself from the hand if only your opponent controls monsters, but that's far too unreliable to focus on. So instead we can summon him with our effects, but it's cool that we can summon him that way if we're going second and we happen to open him. What's so great about him is that he protects all other Ancient Warriors from targeting effects. They simply have to target him himself, and by doing so, any of their targeting effects aren't going to be bothering our Ancient Warriors, because if they use their targeting effect, they have to use it on this, and if they don't use it on this, then they still can't use it on your other Ancient Warriors, basically meaning that against targeting interruption, your Ancient Warriors can do whatever they like without fear of opponent's interruption. This guy also punishes the opponent for leaving him on the field, because if the opponent opponent controls more monsters than you can target and destroy one of the opponent's monsters. Even better for breaking through boards. This guy is just so great when it comes to follow-up plays and breaking boards, so he's awesome to summon from the deck using Zhongban. We might instead choose to summon Zhongdae from the deck. This is the guy from earlier who can special summon himself if you control 2 ancient warriors. On your turn, he also gains 300 attack for each monster the opponent controls. With 2700 base attack, it means you can summon this from the deck with Zhongban. He could be between 3k and 3900 attack. The thing is, at 2700, hopefully he will be too big for some of the opponent's monsters to beat over, and then on your follow-up play, he'll be gaining all of that attack and maybe helping you to break through their board. It's in a way punishing the opponent for making their board too big. If the opponent controls more monsters than you too, he can also activate an effect that lets him attack monsters twice that turn. So you could activate that before summoning more monsters, and even if you have equal or more monsters when it's your battle phase, you'll have already activated that effect, so it's still be able to double attack to break the opponent's board and make for easy OTKs. Perhaps the coolest of the big ancient warriors is the fearsome Zhang Yuan. This one might not be summoned from the deck with the Zhongban's grave effect. However, if you have an additional search available, for example if you already had your search target in hand, then you could search for this, because at the start of the damage step, if an ancient warrior's monster battles a face-up monster, then Zhang Yuan will summon itself from hand and reduce the opponent's attack by 1000 attack, which is usually going to result in the monster losing that battle, which might actually trigger Zhang Yuan's other effect. If an opponent's card is destroyed, then this can target another of their cards and destroy it. Not only do they lose their monster by battle, but they are losing another of their cards. That bonus destruction effect can trigger in other scenarios too, like if a rocket tracer destroys something, summon another rocket from the deck, then Zhang Yuan will invalidate it by destroying one of their cards, potentially screwing them out of their plays. Regardless, Zhang Yuan protects your ancient warriors from battle destruction, so even if the reduction doesn't reduce the opponent's attack enough to lose the battle, your monster still gets to stick around, and the opponent will have no choice but to attack into Zhang Yuan himself if they want to destroy anything in battle. At this point, I want to acknowledge that most of these monsters' names are a bit rough to remember or pronounce. Because of this, I'd like to put forth a couple of options for discussing these monsters. Most people don't know how to pronounce Chinese names, and if you don't, then it might be better to mention all of these monsters' names by the adjectives that come before their names so that nobody is confused about which monster you are talking about. Sun Mao can be called masterful or master. Zhuge Kong can be called ingenious. Liu Xuan can be called virtuous. Zhongdae can be called valiant. Guan Yan can be called loyal. Zhang Yuan can be called fearsome. Zhongban can be called defense. And lastly, Double Dragon Lord, even though it is a fully English name, it might be easier just to call him DDL. Apart from the Double Dragon Lords, this deck doesn't rely too heavily on the extra deck. We have our super simple survival and board breaking game plan with some interruption in there as well. However, this deck doesn't prevent you from using the extra deck in any way, so you can really use the other slots to fill whatever purposes you need. Between the different kinds of removal this deck has, like Guan Yan and Zhang Yuan destroying cards, Sun Mao and Double Dragon Lords bouncing cards, the other battle related board breaking effects, there are certain kinds of protection that this deck might have an issue with. Of course, if we need to remove something without destroying it, it shouldn't be an issue, but when it comes to non-targeting removal, all that we have is East by South Winds, which you might not even choose to play. We might need a few other ways to remove things without targeting or without destroying, or both. In the case of cards like Leo Dancer, in cases where we need specific forms of removal, we can use Borrowload Dragon, Lightning Chidori, or the Tiger King Joe Exotic. If Borrowload Dragon attacks, it can steal its attack target and put it into a zone that it points to. This effect doesn't target or destroy, and Borrowload Dragon himself can't be targeted by monster effects, which might make this easier. Regardless, you're going to get rid of an opponent's monster without targeting it or destroying it, and it'll stay on your field until the end of the next turn, and your opponent won't even get it back. It'll just go right to the grave. Lightning Chidori requires 2 wind monsters, so only Zhuge Kong and Liu Xuan can be used to summon it, but on summon it returns any opponent's back row to the bottom of the deck. And it can attach a material to return any opponent's card to the top of the deck. This does not target with both effects, but it doesn't destroy with either of them. But the main thing we have to keep in mind is that it can get rid of 2 different cards just by itself, one back row and then any other card. 2 removals for 1 card is just awesome. But you should keep in mind that you wouldn't want to summon this to the extra monster zone, because it being a thunder Thunder monster would lock you out of being able to use it as material for the double Dragon Lord. Tiger King doesn't actually remove anything, but it requires 2 Beast Warriors, and on summon it can send any fire formation from the deck, so you could potentially search Tenki for searches or Gyoku for back row pinning. But the main thing about this guy is that it can detach a material to negate the effects of all effect monsters on the field except Beast Warriors. Negating the opponent's whole board might be able to turn off those monsters' negates, or at least bait out those negates, and turn off any protective effects, meaning that any of your other removal effects will work without a problem. It is important to note though that Tiger King doesn't work against Leo Dancer, as Leo Dancer is a Beast Warrior. So for Leo Dancer, you're probably going to want to try to beat over it with Zhongdi or steal it with Borrow Load. If you need some other kind of back row removal, you could use Firefighting Daruma Doll. As a Beast Warrior that doesn't require any levels, you could use this and then use it as material for another double Dragon Lord, but it can target a back row on each player's side of the field and destroy them. This is going to be more helpful in this deck that is so focused around continuous spells, being able to get the grave effects of our sagas, or potentially clearing up room for you to activate more continuous spells. What's nice about this too is that if it destroys an opponent's monster by battle, it can add one of your Beast Warriors from your graveyard or the banish back to your hand. Its base attack being 1500 can be buffed by its other effect to gain 100 attack for each of your Beast Warriors including itself, and it could potentially be buffed even more by your fire formations. So you could potentially get big enough to destroy your opponent's monsters and potentially add back your Ancient Warriors from a graveyard or banish pile. And that's actually really relevant because in this deck we don't actually have any graveyard strategies for our monsters. Opening us up, take advantage of Dimensional Fissure. Dimensional Fissure is a continuous spell that very simply says that any monster that would be sent to the grave is banished instead. Almost every deck in the game wants to have monsters in their grave, so the fact that we aren't hurt by this can really give us an added layer of strength against those kinds of decks. Decks that don't care about monsters in their grave are a super rare thing. Even better than that though is that if you have Dimensional Fissure, the opponent won't be able to interrupt your plays with cards like Effect Veiler and Ice Dragon's Prison. Effect Veiler has to be able to put itself into the grave in order to activate. While Dimensional Fissure is on the field, it can't do that, so it won't be able to negate your monsters with Effect Veiler. Ice Dragon's Prison needs to be able to revive a monster from your grave in order to banish that monster and a monster on your field. But if you use Dimensional Fissure, your opponent's monsters will be banished instead of put into the grave, so you won't have any monsters for the opponent to target with the Ice Dragon's Prison, which is really helpful because Ice Dragon's Prison would ordinarily be pretty hard for a deck like this that is entirely one monster type. This deck can get follow-up plays without needing to rely on your monsters in the graveyard, and your back row still gets to go to the grave to activate their grave effects since the Dimensional Fissure only banishes monsters. The only issue you got to keep in mind with Dimensional Fissure is that when you have it active, you won't be able to send monsters to the grave for the effects of Sun Mao or Double Dragon Lords, but you'll still be able to send your back row. So real quick, this is what my deck looks like, but I do want to talk about a few things in regards to options because there truly is a lot of different choices you can make with this deck. Like for real, I'm not here to tell you how to build your deck, but I will gladly give you a bunch of different options. The first thing I want to talk about is the fire formations. I only play 3 Tenki and 3 Tensu. I did mention that you can play Gyoku in this deck, and really if you are a budget player that doesn't own any copies of Dimensional Fissure, you could totally just replace the fissures with some amount of Gyokus to pin down back row. I'm focusing on Tensu here because it can help us play through interruptions, because it can help us play through interruptions rather than hoping to snipe down a particular back row. You might be able to play through whatever relevant interruptions the opponent has rather than relying on hope with the Gyoku that also can't help us against monster effects. This isn't to say that you shouldn't play Gyoku. I think it's a great card and you should at the very least side deck it, but if you have to pick, then Tensu is going to be more versatile when working against interruptions. You could also choose to cut down on copies of Tenki to add some Gyokus, since you can return Gyoku from hand to the deck with a skill to search for Tenki. The only issue with that for me is that the skill can only be used once per duel, so you can only search Tenki once that way, and being able to top deck Tenki is great in the grind game, since if you have no cards left, then using Tenki to search for Sun Mao will have Tenki immediately usable as fodder for Sun Mao's searching effect. In your opening hand too, opening a copy of Tenki by having 3 copies in the deck is also nice because it means you don't have to use a skill. So on subsequent turn, any fire formations you have in hand could be turned into a Tenki for the exact same reason. If I were to keep playing 3 Tenki and 3 Tensu and then add copies of Gyoku, then I would either be making the deck size bigger than I want it to be, or I would be cutting cards that I don't really want to cut. But at the end of the day, that's just personal preference, and you can definitely make your own decisions when it comes to the fire formations. Next, I want to talk about the sagas East by South Winds and Defense of Shangban. The survival that Shangban provides you is so important to this deck's opening play that it isn't really a question of whether you should play it, but what number you should play it at. I think that playing it 3 copies is certainly too much because it doesn't contribute to any of your plays. you'll only ever need to activate it once, so just playing one to search for the double Dragon Lords is all you'll ever need. However, I will say that I can understand why some players might like to play two, since if you happen to open it, then your double Dragon Lords could be able to instead search for a Zhang Yuan for added protection and board breaking. When it comes to East by South wins, I believe this card on a follow-up play or on an OTK play can basically act as a win button when you get its grave effect off. The opponent being unable to respond to your effects lets you pretty much play for free, and being able to destroy their whole board in a way that they can't respond to is just so powerful. This card really just feels like a win button when you use it. However, I can appreciate that some duelists feel that this deck is strong enough to win without it, and I do agree that it is. I personally just like to play it because I know there will be certain decks that can really press us. With this might actually be necessary to beat them, so you could at least side deck one copy against those decks, and I wouldn't be too opposed to you cutting this from your main deck. Apart from these things, the ratios for the archetype itself, you simply have to play 3 Sun Mao. You really need this guy to get your plays going and to be able to get a second one in case the opponent removes the first one before his effects go up. And it's great that you can bonus normal summon it with a Tensu. You don't really need more than one of each of the big guys because they can all be accessed from the deck when you need them. Zhuge Kong should be played at least 2 copies so that you can get the main play of the deck off a second time as a follow-up play, though you could play a 3rd copy if you wanted. Liu Xuan is here to let us validate our amazing hands that already have all the things that we would otherwise search by being a way to let our Zhuge Kong negate monsters. But all that said, you don't strictly have to play him because you won't always be able to get that play off. We have to play 3 copies of 3 visits, as just like Sun Mao, it is a consistency card. And really, you should always max out on consistency. But another nice thing about it is that it can simply be activated as a negate fodder for the Zhuge Kong, so it's not going to be useless in multiples. Now this is where I'm going to be a little less liberal. I have seen some people playing less than 3 copies of double Dragon Lords. It might be true that you can win games with just 1, or even just 2. However, when you build your deck, you don't build it for what's going to happen some of the time. You should build it for the whole picture in mind. There are going to be grindy games where you end up using all 3 double Dragon Lords against tough opponents, and you may be using copies of itself to summon other copies of itself to get the search going as the game goes on. Being able to do that repeatedly throughout the duel means that your grind game is going to be fantastic. If nothing else, I gotta say you should play 3 of this, but hey bro, if you play 2, you play 2. I'm not gonna try to force your hand or anything. This is just my reasoning for why I think 3 is best. Everything else in the extra deck, strictly speaking, is personal preference, though I will say if you have Firefighting Darumadol in your collection, there's no reason to play Nightmare Phoenix, as Phoenix locks you out of your plays by occupying the extra monster zone as a card that can't be used to summon double Dragon Lords. And discarding a card isn't as beneficial as gaining additional value from your numerous continuous spells with the Darumadol, and that recycling ability that Darumadol has is just more icing on the cake. There is another flex spot in the deck you can use however you like. For me, I like to put Abyss Dweller in there since there are certain decks that it just outright wins games against by itself, so if you can summon it and have the room, you should probably play it. But as I said guys, I'm not here to tell you how to build your deck, I'm just here to show you how to play it. So let's just get into the replay, shall we? Okay, so here I'm going against Blue Eyes, and I actually end up getting pretty much the best hand you can get. Okay, I don't have any starters in my hand. No, I have a Tenki. And I have this extension play, the 3 visits. It's also important that I opened the Shongban. Opening the Shongban means I can search for something else, and I also have this extender in the Zhongdi. So having an extender so I don't have to search for it, and the Shongban so I don't have to search for it, that's really nice. So I can fire off the 3 visits, fire off the Tenki. Tenki's going to search the starter Sun Mao. I can summon that Sun Mao, and because the 3 visits gets the search for me, I can save my Sun Mao search for something else. So I can search the Zhuge Kong. Zhuge Kong summons itself. Sun Mao can send the Tenki to search for the Liu Xuan, so that when on the opponent's turn I negate a back row using the Zhuge Kong, I can send the 3 visits for cost for that, which will also let me special summon the Liu Xuan so I can negate a monster. So that's really great, and I already have the extender in the Zhongdi, so I can summon that, go into the double Dragon Lords, making sure it is a wind attribute, the Zhongdi, so that's how I can go into the double Dragon Lords, because Sun Mao is not a wind attribute. Anyway, go into the double Dragon Lords. Double Dragon Lords can search for the fearsome Zhang Yuan, which is just an amazing hand trap. But here I already have the trap, so I can just set that and end my turn. This is pretty much the best situation. This is the best case situation of the deck, and it isn't that uncommon. And if you play more copies of Shongban, you could even have this more often. So yeah, the opponent's going to go. I'm going to flip up the Shongban right away. He's going to use Blue Eyes Dimension to search his Monster Reborn. And when he activates that Monster Reborn, I am going to be able to negate it using the Zhuge Kong, sending the 3 visits. There's also going to trigger the 3 visits to summon my Liu Xuan from the hand. And he's going to use Melody. I can't negate that, but he's going to search a Chaos Max and a Blue Eyes. He's going to be able to reveal the Blue Eyes to summon an alternative, and when he uses his alternative to try to destroy me, I can use my Zhuge Kong to send my Shongban to negate it. It's still going to be there, but it's going to be negated, and he still can't attack, I believe. So I can can use my double Dragon Lords to try to bounce the Blue Eyes, and it works. So he can actually still attack because of the fact that the activation was negated, but I can still trigger my defense of Shongban in the grave to summon from the deck. So I'm going to summon the Loyal Guanyan, and I'm also going to activate the Zhang Yuan from hand to reduce the Blue Eyes to 2000 attack. It's still going to be enough to get rid of my double Dragon Lords. However, I'm going to have a pretty huge field and they're not going to have a whole lot. Whitestone Vengeance is still going to summon a Solid. Solid is going to negate this guy because he's the only guy who can't be targeted. So now these guys can't be targeted too. What are you targeting, bro? You're preventing me from doing nothing. I'm going to use my double Dragon Lords. Because of the fact that Zhang Yuan does protect him from battle, he's still there. I'm sending the Guanyan from field to grave to bounce his Solid Dragon to bait it out, which is going to make him summon a Blue Eyes from the deck. But then I can link him off to go into this double Dragon Lords, which will search for us the East by South Winds, activate that, activate its own effects to see if it works. And it does work, so it sends itself to the grave, giving us that amazing benefit that he cannot respond to us, and whenever we attack, we destroy them. Which also synergizes with the Zhang Yuan, which if a card is destroyed, you get to destroy another card. So I attack, it destroys a card, which triggers them to destroy another card, so I can just attack directly twice. Ooh, that's some really nice board breaking, bro. Alright, I'm going against Trickstars here, and this was kind of a tilty game. But I do have the D Fizzy, so he cannot activate the Effect Veiler. If he does have Effect Veilers, D Fizzy will turn it off, so he can't be doing that. I also have the Tensu to give me bonus normal summons, and I have the Tenki to search a starter. And I already have the starter. And if I was going second, I might just choose to search for another starter, just in case, so that the Tensu can bonus normal summon it. But instead I can just search for the Liu Shen, just in case. Because I have the Tensu, the first normal summon I attempt with a Beast Warrior is going to be counted as my bonus normal summon. So if Tensu goes away, I still have my normal summon left, my regular normal summon. But yeah, I'm going to be able to send the Tenki to get myself a Zhuge Kong, which is going to trigger the Zhuge Kong to summon itself, and I'm going to be able to normal summon with my regular normal summon, the Liu Shen. Then I can link summon into the double Dragon Lords, which is going to search for me my Shangban. I can set the Shangban on his draw phase. I'm going to flip it right up so that I can negate back row. He has a Dark Hole. Of course, I'm going to negate the Dark Hole, sending the Shangban from the field to the grave. Luckier dog, though, he has another Dark Hole. Yeah, must be nice. But anyway, he's got Trickstar Festival. He's going to be able to go into Crimson Heart. He's going to be able to summon a Carbane next to it. He's trying to go for game. He's going to gain some life. He's going to gain even more with his skill. Then he's going to pay 2k, draw 2 cards. I'll draw 1 card. He's going to attack in, but I still have the Shangban in the grave to summon the Wang Yan in from the deck. So here he can't beat over me anymore. He thought that he could win, but he summoned his Carbane. But even if he had his Carbane, it would only have killed this, and I still got the Sun Mao that he let me draw. And I'm going to use my my Guanyan to destroy one of his monsters, since he does control more monsters than me, and then using the bonus normal summon of Tensu, I can summon my Sun Mao. Sun Mao is going to be able to send the Tensu itself to search for my Zhuge Kong. Zhuge Kong, that's my second copy, can summon itself, which was also going to trigger my Sun Mao to bounce his link. Now I can use my Tenki to search for another Sun Mao. I can link off to go into double Dragon Lords. Double Dragon Lords can get a search for me. I'm going to search for the East by South Winds. I can't even really use it. I'm going to try to use it though, but I'm going to normal summon my Sun Mao. I already have lethal. But just to flex, I'm going to flip a coin. Ah, I didn't get it. I still get lethal, bro. That's like 6k. That's like 6k damage, bro, and I overwhelmed it. So I'm going second against Luton Lights here. I do have the Dimensional Fissure, which is amazing against them if you happen to go first, but it is what it is. At the end of the day, it still can turn off some of their follow-up play, but they got their main plays going. They're going to be able to set up a couple of rank 4s while also setting up some graveyard. They got their Crimson Fox in here as well to help protect against targeting when that's relevant. So that's really just some great standard Lunar Light gameplay going on. Just about to finish setting up their board here, and they go into the Evil Soul Nightmare. This deck doesn't actually care about an opponent having Abyss Dweller, but of course they don't really have a choice but to go into Abyss Dweller, do they? But they have the Evil Soul Nightmare. That is kind of annoying, because if they have Evil Soul Nightmare, then me summoning the Zhuge Kong isn't going to matter. It's just going to be flipped down. So instead I'm going to have to go for a different strategy. I have a Tenki. Hell yeah, I get even more. Tenki is going to be able to get me the Liu Xuan. It can be nice to just get it out the deck, but I'm going to summon my Sun Mao. Sun Mao is going to send a Tenki, of course, to search for the Zhang Yuan. I can set my back row and attack in, and I can summon my Zhang Yuan during damage step. Basically, his Nightmare can't activate during that time, so I can beat over this because the card was destroyed, I can also destroy his tiger, so he can't use his tiger anymore. Very nice. The tiger is still going to be able to revive this, but the main thing is I don't want him to have a tiger in the back row. So I'm going to be able to use my Zhang Yuan to attack into his nightmare, and it's up to him now. He can't really play through a dimensional fissure. He can't get the wolf engrave that he needs, so instead he's just going to go into a Castel. And I'm also, you might notice that in previous games I was flipping up my Shangban as soon as possible. There's not really a need to do that in this situation, because the only reason to flip it up is to have it available to send with a Zhuge Kong, but I don't really need to do that now. So I know he can summon Castel, so I'm not flipping it up just yet so that it can't be returned. He can only return the monster now, and then after that I can flip it up. So I'm still going to be battle protected. Here I am now. I still have my stutter. I can use it again. Send the D Fizzy, because it's not going to be needed anymore. Search for the extender Zhongdi. I haven't normal summoned yet. I can normal summon the Zhuge Kong, summon the Zhongdi. I technically have game now. I activated an effect, which means I can bounce it. I can go into double Dragon Lords. I'm just flexing at this point. I get the winds, activate the winds, use the lords to bounce his tanky. You shouldn't bounce people's tankies, okay? Don't bounce people's continuous spells that get searches for them. Not a good idea. I'm just flexing at this point because I clearly already have game. But yeah, GG's. This deck kind of reminds me of Tenyi, since it has its own ways of being able to deal with pretty much any situation, and it's able to change its game plan depending on the situation. But of course, just like Tenyi, this deck can put up some pretty tough boards of its own. I certainly hope this video gives you what you need to be able to play this deck well, but if you feel like you need more, click on our Discord link in the description below to talk to some more Ancient Warriors experts. Big shout out to our current Intercontinental Champion Aloysius. He's been grinding with this deck a lot to find the perfect list, and it is the list that I've shown in this video. Go subscribe to his channel if you haven't already. But yeah guys, other than that, if you have any thoughts or questions, leave them in the comments. Which Ancient Warriors Kingdom do you support? And if you liked this video, then slap like now. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell to get notified every time we make a new video. Have yourselves a good one, guys. And I've been Undead from Team 6K, signing out.
Hey, why they gotta hate on me? I done got me 250,000 views and they still saying they low key. They ain't wanna come work with the kid, but I'm flexing with Zay on beats. How they ask for a spot at the gym, but they leave all the weight on me. I don't ask them to wait on me. They would ask where they gon' be with a song if they wanted the weatherman. I ain't ask them to pay no fees. She was homeless and needed a spot. I ain't ask her to pay no lease. I ain't ask her to say no please. I ain't ask her to make no cheese. Scream fake, but it ain't on me. Got clean, so it ain't no streets. Why green if it ain't no keeps? Brought cream, so it ain't no beef. My team say it ain't no chief. My demon, they hang on me. They seemingly ain't no peace. I seen him, he ain't no beast. For real.